Here we are. Here we are. Yeah,
We made it to another Monday.
we did. I will confess it's not Monday, it's Wednesday, but we have a good excuse. We had the virtual festival gathering of the Network of Biblical Storytellers on all day Friday, all day Saturday. And in the midst of that on Saturday, we got word that our pastor actually was in the hospital. He's okay now, but anyway, they needed a fill-in preacher. So Tom agreed to do that. So anyway, it's been a pretty full week, but we are here and we are excited to be telling you and doing some commentary on the last of the four bread from heaven discourses in John 6. Right, Tom? Aren't we excited about that?
Well, yeah, well,
Actually,
I think we're up for it.
Yeah. It's really been a good learning experience. I had certainly never paid much attention to this particular discourse, and it's been really interesting to spend some time, puzzling over it and thinking about it. So without further ado, we're going to share the telling of this as best we can. So I'll start. Okay, so Jesus is speaking, and this actually begins with a little bit of last week's story. He says, those who eat my flesh and drink my blood will abide in me, and I in them, just as the Father has sent me, and I, the living Father, just as the living Father has sent me, and I live because of him, so those who eat my flesh will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate, for they died. But the one who eats this bread will live forever. Now, Jesus said these things while he was teaching in Capernaum, and many of his disciples, when they heard it, they said, "This is a difficult teaching. Who can accept it?" And when Jesus was aware that they were complaining among themselves, he said, "Does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life."
But among you, there are some who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones that did not believe and who was the one that would betray him. And he said, "For this reason I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father." Well, at this, many of his disciples left him and no longer went around with him. And he said to the 12, "Do you also want to leave?" And Peter said to him, "Lord, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God."
All right, there you have it. John 6, verses 56 to 69. Now, early on, so Jesus says, that whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood will live forever. And many of the disciples, were told in the story, respond by saying, "This is a difficult teaching." Now, would happen to agree with that. So it doesn't seem like any big mystery, but Tom, what is it, that you think was difficult for them about this teaching?
Well, it's the same things that many of the same things that are difficult about it for us. This is weird to say that, eat my flesh and drink my blood is really, really provocative. And it led to at the time of Roman persecutions of saying these people are cannibals, and so they eat flesh and drink blood, and you can understand why, because Jesus said this. But what he meant was, if you have an intimate, a close personal relationship with me, if you literally live my life and are connected with my life. Now, later on, he says, the flesh is useless. But what he means is that these elements of his very self are then connected with a disciple, one who eats his flesh and drinks his blood. It's pushing the limit of what is even believable, to force people to think, no, it can't be this literal. It rather is that you're connected with me.
Yeah, right, because it does, this particular segment does begin with abiding in me and I will abide in you, which is a theme that we hear elsewhere in the Gospel of John.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, now, Jesus also says that he knows that some will not believe. And he's talking to disciples, apparently fairly large group of disciples, not just, the 12 disciples that we hear about so much. But who besides Judas Iscariot would he have known wouldn't believe?
Yeah, well, we don't know anybody else in terms of the stories, but what is implicit in this is that the disciples were those who were listening to the gospel being told by John, by the storyteller of John, and that this audience then are all potential disciples, and that he is addressing then this, and that he knows ahead of time who are the people in the audience who are going to accept this, who are going to believe, and those who are not. And that he knew also the one who was going to betray him. So there is a sense in which this is a kind of foreknowledge that Jesus has that is implied.
Well, and that feels kind of consistent with what he says next, which is no one can come to me except those who are granted by the Father. I'm not sure if that's it's sort of not foreknowledge, I guess, but it's well, anyway, I just that's strange too, and that saying really offended a lot of these disciples, because they left when they were really ticked off and they just left. So
right.
What is it about that that you think would have offended them so much that they would just leave? They were done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one dimension of it would be, what do you mean? We don't have any choice in this matter? To heck with this. We're out of here. We have a choice. We can choose to stay or we can choose to leave. So we'll choose to leave. But of course, that only, reinforces at one level what Jesus is saying, that he knew ahead of time. And this is kind of an early version of the Calvinist.
It does sound rather Calvinist.
Controversy about whether you can really choose or whether you're predestined. this isn't quite predestination.
Yeah, but
But
you
it
could
is
see
a
where you
recog-
could get there. You could see how
Yeah,
you
you could go, you
run
could
with
pick
this.
it.
Yep. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you and I are both come from a Wesleyan tradition, and Wesley had, his first. He was all about grace, and the first kind of grace he talked about was prevenient grace, which was God, reaching out to everybody, really. So anyway, this is quite different than that understanding, I think, of grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I've come, I went to a Presbyterian seminary union in New York, and so I came to appreciate Calvinist thought in regard to this, and it's just tough-minded.
Yeah.
Nobody can claim that they chose and that
Right.
therefore they're virtuous and good because they chose to be a disciple. It is a recognition that it's the energy of the Spirit of God that even enables people to come to a place of belief and of following Jesus. And
well, this
it's a kind of
passage,
humility and tough-mindedness. You didn't do this on your own.
Yeah.
God enabled you.
Yeah. We think of Matthew as having so many teachings about discipleship, but this really does seem to be a lot about discipleship. So would you talk a little bit more about what it means to be a disciple, and particularly as it's in sort of the Gospel of John's understanding of that?
Yeah. Well, I'll name some elements. First of all, the word for disciple means one who follows. So to be a disciple is to follow Jesus. And that's present implicit in this saying. There were some who turned away and they no longer followed him. They no longer went around with him. Another dimension of it that is not talked about, but that is implicit, is that a disciple learns the teachings of his teacher. So what a disciple does, and this is reflected in the rabbinic tradition as well as in the Jewish Christian tradition, that a disciple is one who learns the sayings, the words, the teachings of the rabbi and internalizes them, knows them by heart. Another dimension is that a disciple is one who is sent as an apostle to further extend the teacher's teaching and his work. That another dimension is stated many, many times in the Gospel of John, which is to believe in him and to stay with him, to remain, to abide with him. So a disciple is one who abides with, who stays with, doesn't leave, doesn't get frustrated. Well, maybe gets frustrated, but doesn't leave. And another dimension of discipleship is to receive the energy and life of the teacher. So in this case, a disciple, these disciples are ones who are who receive the very life, the life blood, the life energy of Jesus. And another part of this is to be part of the community of disciples. That a disciple is one who joins then the community of those who follow Jesus. The last part of this addresses that issue for every listener: to follow or not to follow, to be a disciple or not to be a disciple. And these sayings have been so provocative that they then are a kind of test for whether one wants to, have anything more to do with this. So at this point in the gospel, my sense is that this is a kind of turning point for the audience, for the listeners, as to whether or not they're going to stick around to hear the rest of the story, and whether or not they will have the energy and life to follow, or whether they're just going to, go off and do their own thing.
Right. So at the beginning of this story, there's, if you imagine it, there's there's a group of disciples, larger than the 12. But then at the end, it does focus in on the 12. And, Jesus asked them, do you also want to go? And I love this next, what Simon Peter, the way he answers, because it just really helped me understand some of what's gone on in my own spiritual life. So he says, Lord, to whom would we go? And when I kind of reflected on that question that Simon Peter asked, it reminded me of quite a few times in my life, I've gotten so distressed with things that church has done in the past, things that a lot of Christians do or believe or, are today. Sometimes these teachings just seem like they're pretty unbelievable, or I wonder if it's all worth it. And I think, in my mind, I imagine, well, what would it be to quit being a disciple of Jesus or quit being a, church goer? And when I think about it, I kind of come to that place. Where would I go? What would I kind of hang my life on? So anyway, I thought that's kind of a profound question. Also, you said the word lifeblood a little while ago, and that was really interesting to me because that is a phrase we use, and it helps this story make some sense when you think about lifeblood, because it's all about drinking Jesus' blood, and we do use that phrase and understand what that means.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
It's a connection.
Yep.
Yep.
Anything else you want to say, Tom, before we sign off today?
Well, here we are. We're leaving John 6. We've been here, and it has been a rich exploration of the metaphors that are present in this discourse. Also, the things that are difficult and that are hard to understand. And John really tackles them. And so this has been I've really enjoyed this. And hope that's been the case for everybody who's tuning in.
All right, everybody. Have a good week. See you next week.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.